Over the past few weeks, the talk about media reporting on the riots and the protests that have been going on has died down somewhat since last Wednesday, when there was the hoax of all of the different riots supposedly being organised that were then all simultaneously counter-protested against nobody who showed up by thousands of leftists who all happened to show up with Stand Up to Racism and Socialist Worker Party professionally printed placards. Things have died down since then. It was a very successful operation.
Yeah, it's
sadly.
just a complete win for the forces of anti-racism, wasn't it?
The forces of evil.
Yeah. The fash were well and truly bashed, and now there's nothing you don't need to worry about.
So bashed they didn't even show up. In fact, it's quite remarkable.
The politics of hate were defeated thoroughly on that day. It was the new Cable Street, I understand.
Oh yeah, I've heard that as much as well. But obviously, for the people who were involved in the protests and the people who were arrested, the ordeal is still very much going on, and there are going to be people included in those cohorts who absolutely engaged in violent activity against the police and involved themselves in looting. There was some infamous videos going around of people breaking into a lush and nicking bath bombs, and if you're going to get arrested, nicked for anything, I think that's a pretty rubbish reason.
There was that Greg's kid who got half-inched a load of sausage rolls.
Being from the north, I can at least sympathise with the temptation there. But yeah, it's still going on, and the way that it's still being prosecuted, the convictions, the charges that are going on, is still showing very much that there is the two-tier system in place. Nothing has been done to address that, and nothing whatsoever has been done to address the initial root causes for why these protests erupted in the first place. There is still no justice for the family members of the 3 girls, and including the 8 other children who were murdered and stabbed. That trial, I believe, is still planned at the moment for next January. So again, it's incredible how for white British people they can get very, very quick convictions, but for foreigners they can't. It has to be extended, delayed. So I've made the mention that speedy trials are a function of white privilege. I can only assume so.
Well, it's interesting actually, because just today Neil O'Brien, who's a Conservative MP, has just posted stats showing that since 2007, 50,000 people who have previous convictions have escaped prison despite having convictions for carrying a knife, sexual assault, robbery, and burglary. 50,000 people. Yet if you're a 55-year-old carer for your husband, who's never done anything wrong in her life, has led a life of decency and respectability, and in one moment of madness posts something on Twitter, on Facebook, and then deletes it immediately, you go into the clink. I mean, it's clear evidence of two-tier policing. Look, as somebody who's rather conservative, I'm of course in favor of law and order. In the 2011 riots, we also saw draconian action taken to quench that. But as you say, it's the hypocrisy, it's the double standards, because of course we've had scenes of Muslim gangs rampaging in the streets. Have we had any charges there? I haven't heard of any. We've had, scenes, even during the Palestinian marches, of course, we had calls for jihad and for intifada on the streets.
We had video
Nothing has been done of that.
Sky and other platforms of people cycling up to the reporters screaming "Free Palestine," surrounded by large gangs of people with weapons.
And nothing offends the British more than hypocrisy and double standards. If everybody was treated equally draconian, in an equally draconian manner, I think there'd be far less of the anger than we're seeing now. There'd be another debate that would be being had. But it's the severity with which decent, law-abiding people are being treated at the same time that we see reports of, remember that Muslim migrant who was let off because he raped a 13-year-old girl, but he didn't know that it was illegal to have sex with a 13-year-old girl.
Sadly, there
are so many examples of this, time and time again, and that's what sticks in the craw. And as you say, when we had the rioting in 2011, what did we hear from Labour and from the Tories? Well, we have to deal with the root causes of why they were rioting. 2020, Black Lives Matter, same thing. You had Starmer and Rayner saying, we understand the feelings over the death of George Floyd, this criminal in America who pointed a gun at a pregnant woman's belly. We understand how you're feeling about this. This time, not once have I heard anyone say, in actually from the senior front benches of the Tory party or the Labour Party, we have to understand the root causes. Instead, They're blaming bad faith actors in the UK, from Tommy Robinson to Lawrence Fox and everybody else, and bad faith actors abroad, from France to China. No one is listening to the people who feel that they are having their country taken away from them. They're feeling dispossessed, and they've seen their towns and cities change beyond all recognition in the space of 2 decades.
No, all very well put there.
I feel like they can't admit it because it's a keystone of their entire worldview. They cannot admit that multiculturalism is a disaster, is a failure, is an insane experiment, really. They can't admit that because it's what most of their worldview is based upon. And as absolutely what you say about two-tier justice, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I'll probably say it more times in the future. That justice is quite often personified as a woman holding a sword and scales, for obvious reasons, but she's blindfolded because she's blind. Justice is supposed to be blind. It has to apply to everyone equally. It has to. Otherwise, it's not real justice. It's not proper justice. So, calling things a two-tier care or two-tier policing system, two-tier justice system, it's actually a very, very polite way, isn't it? It's a very, very kind, soft way of saying that the rule of law has been subverted. The rule of justice itself isn't applied properly. And, you're very close to having a civilizational collapse at that point.
Yeah, and we have to realize it isn't just two-tier policing, as you say. It's two-tier government. It's two-tier reporting. We now have a two-tier nation. And in many senses, you could say it's the British state versus the British people. That's where we've got to right now, when you see a concerted effort by our courts, by our police, by our media, and by the state to suppress anybody who dares to contradict the established narrative. And you're quite right, Bo. It's precisely because they are the ones who are complicit in all of this. They laid the foundation they created the tinderbox that's now igniting through mass immigration. Reform shouldn't have any seats in Parliament if the Tories simply acted like a 1980s Conservative government and was tough on crime and tough on immigration and tough on asylum seekers who are here illegally and not here for genuine purposes. There were so many opportunities that the establishment had here to try to get in control of this situation in quite measured ways. None of that was done. And consequently, we're seeing the results of that, which is, of course, people think, where else can we go? What other routes do we have? We've elected in government after government to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. The British people have been betrayed every time they have elected a government. And now they've just elected a Labour government. Well, they didn't elect a Labour government. They threw out a Conservative government and by default got a Labour government. And they can see that there's no hope for at least another 5 years for any of this to change. And so whilst, of course, you condemn utterly the violence and the terrible scenes we've seen, nevertheless, there are millions more people who are just as angry and who have not taken to the streets violently, but who feel alone. And they feel as if they feel despondent, that they have no future for them and, most importantly, for their children.
And 2 points I'd like to address there before we move on to go through the links that I've got here. So, first of all, I think it cannot be stressed enough how much that this is all a result of mainly the elite class absorbing and drinking the Kool-Aid of the utter insanity of the ideology of a globalist multiculturalism, where you can have foreign populations move to anywhere in the world en masse, create ethnic enclaves that don't deviate from their original culture, and then expect them to somehow mix and get along with an already established population with their own culture. Some, again, have said that this is some kind of 4D Machiavellian power moves going on behind the scenes. I disagree completely. I think these people are, on a certain level, insane. I think that the actions of our leaders cannot be explained outside of them genuinely believing the rubbish that they spout about multiculturalism. And second of all, when it comes to the riots and the people who are being persecuted, as we'll find out as we go on, obviously there are people who have been caught on camera committing violent acts, looting, breaking into shops. Those people, absolutely, we can condemn. I do think for most of these people who have been arrested and are being charged and convicted, especially of the very broad charge of violent disorder, there are a lot of questions and there's a lot of uncertainty over the legitimacy of such charges. Because as we go on, it seems that a lot of these people have been picked up off the streets for being around or in a crowd of people and the police just picking them out and deciding we're going to nick you right here and now. So we'll get onto the evidence that we've got for that as we go on. So first of all, regarding the...
I should just, a friend of mine actually, just before the riots started, you may remember there was a protest outside Downing Street.
Oh, yes.
And my friend, who's, suit and tie wearing chap, wouldn't say boo to a fly, was simply there to show his support and wasn't taking part in anything. And he was simply standing on the wrong side of the street to the recognized area where you could protest. Wasn't even told that he was on the wrong side of never given an opportunity to be informed. Actually, you need to be standing over there. Was handcuffed, kept for a couple of hours on the street, then transported to a police station for over 20 hours before being released. And this is somebody who's never been in trouble with the law before. It's absolutely remarkable that we're in this sort of a situation now.
Yeah, there's been a shocking amount of footage similar to that coming out of people who have been a little bit close to the edge of a pavement, who have been arrested by the police, or again, being part of a larger crowd who are not doing anything violent, and the police decide that they're going to go in, rough a few of them up, and take them, put them in cuffs, and put them in the back of a van. The implications this has for the police just suggests, as Bo said, that there's a complete breakdown of law and order, and that the state are using their stormtroopers, as I've seen quite catchily named, to persecute people who are political dissidents for no other reason from the fact that they are protesting against the state. And again, on the subject of the two tiers, here's Jess Phillips, who has admitted that she had a mistake over a tweet addressing the unrest. This was in response to Richard Tice, who played the clip that I mentioned earlier of a Sky reporter being approached by a man on a motorbike who swore about the EDL, who, again, do not exist anymore, and shouted "Free Palestine," and then other masked men surrounded the reporter and made gestures to the camera. Very threatening behavior, nothing that anybody should support, and this was, of course, done by Middle Eastern and Asian populations. And sharing the video on X, Mr. Tice said, Keir Starmer and Labour no doubt think these pro-Gaza mass folk are far right too. And then Jess Phillips responded saying, these people came to this location because it has been spread that racists were coming to attack them. This information was spread entirely to create this content. Don't spread it, Mr. Tice. So Jess Phillips quite reasonably could be accused of supporting violent actions, supporting harassment, supporting the sorts of things that if she was on the other side of the aisle or not within Labour, she would get arrested for these days because she's playing to her constituents. But this is now able to say, oh, I made a mistake. I should have addressed it different. I should have worded it differently. And she gets off scot-free, whereas your mate from down the pub who maybe tweeted out something inappropriate and then deleted it, sorry, he's getting 2 years.
Quick word about sort of making a mistake. It's not a mistake. Okay, for a start, you're a professional politician, have been for many, many years. You don't accidentally say whole sentences. You don't accidentally type out a sentence and press send by mistake. That's not what it is. Okay, you might think it's a political mistake in hindsight, but the thing itself wasn't a mistake. You know, we speak for a living, so I know what it's like to misspeak. A number of times I've said Victoria when I've meant to say Elizabeth and vice versa. You know, sometimes I'll say Orson Welles when I meant H.G. Wells or something. That's a mistake. Okay, that's misspeaking. You don't accidentally have an opinion and type it out and press send or verbalise it by mistake. I hate this. It's such childish nonsense.
People like Jess Phillips are so used to excusing away behaviours and practices that it's an automatic. It's akin to, you know, putting a hammer onto her knee and having the knee go up. And any time she sees threatening behavior from the Muslim community, the default reaction is to issue a statement like that. And she knows full well how, you know, the dark side of elements in the Muslim community. You know, remember when she was facing down Muslim protesters outside schools in Birmingham. You remember when she was seated there during the election campaign, surrounded by Muslim male elders. She's had a lot of attacks from Muslims over the whole Palestine issue in social media and so forth. She's not naive to what's going on. And yet, even when it's against your own interest, even for a campaigner for women's rights like Jess Phillips, as most feminists are, they're very, very quick to forget about the misogyny and the violence against women and so forth from the Muslim community. It was interesting that this, you know, the rioting from the working class was filled with men and women. Those scenes that I saw that we're referring to here were exclusively male, and noticeably faces were covered up. Now, innocent people coming out to defend their community don't have their faces covered up. They come out. We saw in 2011 when the Sikhs and Turks came out to defend their shops from rioters. They didn't have their faces covered. This was a very, very sinister gang. This Muslim Defense League, perhaps. And Jess Phillips thinks we're all fools. And the level of willful blindness here, I think, is completely outrageous. But unfortunately, it's par for the course.
They have to lie. It's baked in. I mean, as you say, a lot of feminists will just be blind to the misogyny that's in Islam. But they'll go further. When she was at least verbally attacked, or people in her campaign were maybe physically attacked, or their car tyres were during the general election, she said it was just men. It was just men that did this against women. Nothing further than that. I mean, they have to lie and misrepresent about reality.
They love their euphemisms. Yeah. They really love their euphemisms.
Well, the alliance between the left and radical Muslims always ends one way. Just look at the Iranian Revolution. The students allied with the Ayatollah to overthrow the Shah. As soon as they came into power, the students were the first ones to be strung up. So,
I mean, look at the Palestinian activists who ran for the Green Party earlier this year and won, and the first thing that they did they jump on saying, right now it's time to tackle environmental issues? No, they certainly did not. They immediately got out their Palestine flags and started shouting slogans. Moving on to the police. So this was a footage that Turning Point released the other day, coming from the August 14th Pakistan Independence Day, of the police not in riot gear. We mentioned the instances that we'll be referring to in a moment of the police just arresting English people for gathering in crowds. They were in full riot gear and decided to arbitrarily pick people out. What happens when it's a large foreign Pakistan population celebrating the independence of a foreign nation? Well, what do the police do here? Do a little dance.
I don't recall them doing any Morris dancing on St. George's Day, do you?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, God, if only I could see something like that. No, this is clearly, again, the police showing their biases, showing who their real constituents are. And on the and keep this in mind as well as we go along. So this is what they do when it's foreign populations in large crowds out in the street dancing and causing a ruckus, as these sorts of things always do. What happens to the British population, the actual people who, in one way, misguided in the ways that they do it, or not maybe, trying to protect their country or do what they think is protecting the country? Well, they get more than 1,000 of them arrested. The National Police Chief Council said 1,024 have been arrested and 575 charged across the UK. We are getting some very, very quick convictions from this. There's this large article talking about it. So here's one that I picked out here. Andrew McIntyre in Liverpool Crown Court today, charged with encouraging murder, violent disorder, and possession of a bladed article. Of course, if that's true, then of course he needs to be punished for such a thing. Joseph Bradford, Jamie Eastbrook, Ellie Jane Cox, and Lisa Bishop are set to be sentenced at Bristol Crown Court for violent disorder, and that's where you start to see violent disorder, very broad, very vague, ambiguous term in the way that they're using it here. Geriant Boyce and Daphne Williams sentenced today for publishing threatening material on a Facebook account intending to stir up religious hatred. So, again, free speech in this country completely dead. Whether or not it was religious hatred or ginning up anything like that, it is a post on Facebook. You shouldn't go to prison for it. Violent disorder suspects have been warned that they could face more serious counts after a 15-year-old boy became the first to be charged with riot. And rioting carries a maximum of 10 years in jail. And there's more reporting from the Metro talking about specific instances. Of course, there are people who did loot, riot, do bad things, and they could deserve punishment for it. But there was one that I wanted to highlight here who got arrested for violent disorder, who is Stephen Malin and Ryan Shears. They were each jailed for 2 years and 2 months after ending up at the very forefront of the mob during unrest in Hartlepool. Malin was described as one of the main instigators of a large-scale disturbance on Murray Street, while Shears was bitten on the backside by a police dog during the incident. And judging by this, in a moment that I'll show you, it basically just looks like assault by the police. So this is what they got arrested for, if the clip plays. Yes, they are acting like dickheads. This is what working class people can be like after a few drinks. It's one of the charming things about them.
But to be fair, he's being belligerent, and I have given him a couple of warnings. But you don't get 2 years in prison for that. Well, you do. But you shouldn't.
Apparently now you do. You should get a slap on the wrist and a warning, especially because neither of them had any prior convictions.
He's obviously had a couple of drinks, and he's being a dick, as you say.
Yeah.
You don't go to prison for 2 years for that, though. I mean, come on. Yeah, a slap on the wrist. Certainly not a custodial sentence. Perhaps nothing at all. Perhaps not even a fine.
And again,
but
you don't.
2 years.
You shouldn't get a police attack dog on you.
Well, yeah, sure.
For that either. Yeah. And again, contrast this again with these guys. What do the police do? These are a bunch of working class yobbos getting rowdy and drinking. They're in full riot gear. They've got the dogs out. What happens when a situation like this is happening? You don't know what's going to happen at a large crowd gathering like this. Well, they're fine. They're happy. They're dandy. They're dancing.
Well, I think a better comparison is with the Hare Hills riots, where we saw the police actually running away from the Roma and Muslims who were rioting on that occasion. I'm in favor of law enforcement. I believe in tough enforcement of the law. I like the German and the Dutch police because they aren't afraid to get hands-on. I think if this chap had just got a sharp hit to the head with a truncheon or something, he probably would have retreated and would have escaped his 2-year prison sentence. So I don't mind police engaging. Although here no one was being violent in this thing, right?
No,
that's the big difference here. This chap was just being provocative. He could easily have just been carried off and made to cool down in a police van for a couple of hours. There are so many ways you could have de-escalated that rather than having such a 2-year sentence, and probably this chap's career prospects also, because now his name is everywhere, anyone who does due diligence. But yeah, I'm all in favor of the police getting tough with all rioters and getting very hands-on. We have such a limp-wristed police usually, except when it comes to the native population.
No, absolutely. And then it gets even worse when you go to Belfast and see what some men are being charged with. So this was an 18-year-old, Cameron Armstrong of Lewis Gardens, who was charged with rioting, and the police told the court that footage had been captured of a male heavily involved with the riot that seemed to match his description, judging by the clothes. But his legal team has said that he had just turned 18 and was there to have a look at what was occurring. They added that he had been encouraged by his sister to stay home, and when he saw the situation deteriorate, he decided to leave. Now, again, this is going to court. We'll see what happens with it. But I would not be surprised if the situation as laid out by the legal team is correct and that he was basically just an onlooker who was like, what's going on here? And they decided to pick him up, because that has been what has been happening. And I wonder how much of this kind of behavior is accounted for all of the violent disorder convictions and a lot of the people who were picked up, particularly in London, such as Sutton Man, a 61-year-old man named David Spring, who was making threatening gestures at police and chanted, "Who the F is Allah?" during large-scale disorder in Whitehall. He's been jailed for 18 months. So this is a picture of him, and you can see him from the bag and the particular shirt that he's wearing. He's an older gentleman, and this was apparently all caught on police cameras. So he's going to prison.
So it's
18 months.
It's only alleged that he chanted that and was being threatening. In that image, it's a very carefully chosen image.
Well, even worse,
the footage seems to show he wasn't really doing anything of the sort.
Well, we've got the footage as laid out by this account, Guy's channel on Twitter, and if I go to a particular timestamp here that I've made a note of, we can see the footage laid out pretty well. So you can see here, I'll go in full screen for the audience. This is the same gentleman, same shirt, same rucksack. Would you agree?
It is definitely him.
Yeah, it's definitely him. So what actually happened?
There is no doubt that the man you're going to see in these video clips is David Spring. And the leader and context of him being arrested was a woman being arrested, and then a second woman being arrested and literally thrown to the ground by the cops. And you can see him right at the beginning here, meandering around. Then the cops arrest the first woman and assault the second woman, and he's right there. You can see him.
Susan, what have you done? What have you done?
Nothing.
Look at that disgusting. Look at this, guys. This is the British police. Shameful. Why are you grabbing her? Why are you grabbing her?
Try nothing.
Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on bully!
This is disgusting. Look at that. 3 officers trying to grab a woman.
After that, they punch a bloke to the ground. This clip is only 17 seconds, but there are 2 focuses. One of the bloke in the middle and towards the right, who is being set upon by the cops, and the other of David Spring to the left, where he's initially talking to the cops, then he sees what's going on and he starts to remonstrate with the cops and presumably swear a little bit at them. This is an image from the beginning, just so he's easier to pinpoint. Okay, and straight on to the video.
We're back.
Immediately following that, he's arrested. This is just a few seconds after the video you just saw. And again, that's where he is at the start of the short clip, and you'll see him commit the crime of walking forwards towards the police, after which they arrest him.
This is his crime.
He's an old man. What are you doing? He's a f***ing old man. What's wrong with you?
18 months in prison.
And this is the sum total of David Spring at Whitehall.
Yeah, that's all the footage that we have of him. He's surrounded by police officers and a large group of people who seemingly are arbitrarily being picked out for heavy-handed treatment for getting a little bit too close to the police each time. He steps forward. What's going on? Boom. Arrested.
And so where's the evidence of him quoting "Who the F is Allah"?
Apparently it's part of the police body cam footage, but we don't have access to any of that. So we have to take their word for it.
What makes this scenario, this situation here particularly egregious in terms of two-tier policing is we just recently, of course, we know that the those chaps who were in a car chanting, "We're going to rape your Jewish daughters," got off and haven't been sent to prison or anything else. And, you know, I don't know if you want to weigh up which is more extreme than saying "Who the F is Allah" or we're going to rape your Jewish daughters. You know, I think the jury is out on that one. At least, hopefully this guy could have had a jury trial, because I think if there was a jury trial rather than the quick way we're seeing these things being dealt with, I think there would be perhaps more common sense being used in these situations.
Catherine Blakelock says that probably these people got convicted so quickly because they pleaded guilty.
Yeah.
Don't plead guilty. No, you have to do a proper file on me, take it to the CPS, they have to think about it, then we'll go to a trial, then a magistrate or a jury can convict me. I'm not just going to let you send me to prison for 18 months.
Problem, of course, if you don't plead guilty, then you're going to get a tougher sentence if you're guilty. If there's video evidence. In this case, unless the body cams show him saying that, I think, this would be a situation in which I wouldn't have pled guilty. I mean, what has he done? Nothing noticeable.
Again, though, there is probably a lot of strong-arming going on with this. You see the way that they're treating them. Do you think that kind of heavy-handed treatment is ending the second the camera is going off? What have they been told when they've been being transported in the police vans? What's been going on there? I would imagine that a lot of these people feel that there is no point in pleading anything other than guilty because they've been told that your life is over. Your life is over. There's no point. And on your point there as well, you know, he himself, David Spring, according to the article, is recently retired and now spends a lot of time for his wife, who's in ill health. So he has dependents who are basically depending on him. But of course, we've seen that if he was a Muslim, as has happened in the past, who has sexually assaulted children, that defense alone, I have dependents, I have family dependents who rely on me, would be enough to let him go. That is sadly, shockingly enough, something that has happened in Britain.
Classic thing that claiming ignorance of the law is no defence whatsoever. I didn't know it was illegal to do this or that. Has always been absolutely no defence whatsoever. Suddenly it is for certain people only.
Yes.
Again, justice turned upside down.
And again, if we go back to the root causes of this, a lot of this is to do with the mass migration that has particularly ramped up in the years since COVID. Who was the person who was administering over that in the Home Secretary position? Well, that was Preeti Patel. This interview has recently come out with GB News, where the interviewer was asking her about this, asked if she felt a need to apologise for record numbers of migrants, 2 million net EU over the past 5 years to June 2023, and that's from non-EU net migration as well, people who are predisposed to not integrate as well, especially, again, if they're allowed to make their own enclaves and not put under any pressure to assimilate. And she decides to get legalistic about it. Oh, well, have you considered the context? Have you considered the social and health and social care visas that were necessary for solving COVID during lockdowns? Have you considered that? Have you considered the Ukraine and Hong Kongers? Well, the fact of the matter is that she is lying. She is lying to deflect either that, or she is completely ignorant of what her own department was doing. When you talk about health and social care, Connor has spoken about this quite a lot. In 2021, I believe it was, 70,000 health and social care visas were granted, and only 11,000 positions were filled.
Precisely.
So if you're going to use that argument, it's a failed argument. And you mentioned, actually, Neil O'Brien. At the end of last year, he released these figures, total net EU migration over the last 5 years, slightly over 2 million. Of the non-EU, only 15% of them, only 15% of them were here to work. Almost the same amount were here as work dependents, so that's them bringing their own families over. The studying, 450,000, only they brought a lot of dependents over as well. Almost over 250,000, 269,000, I should say, asylum, and then we've got humanitarian as well. So if she's trying to use that argument, it is a complete lie deflection, a complete non-acceptance of accountability and responsibility for the effects, the long-lasting and long-term effects that her own policies have brought to this country.
Yeah, and I should say also, I can't remember the exact statistics, but a shocking percentage of those who come on these visas, say for care homes and so forth, come for care homes that don't actually exist. And the number of student visas who come here for people who say they're going to become students who immediately disappear into the underground economy or don't continue their studies after 6 months, it's shocking. And this woman is running to be the leader of the Conservative Party, and she's supposed to be one of the hardliners. They simply don't get it. They still don't get it. They've been given a trouncing, not enough of a trouncing, unfortunately. The Tory party needs to die, because even now, they haven't learned the lesson of the level of betrayal of the British public. And the problem also here is that I try to tell everyone to stop using net migration figures, because net migration figures, if you have 1 million coming in and 400,000 leave, then you've got a net figure of 600,000. But the people who are leaving our country and the people who are coming here are vastly different, because there's a huge element of white flight going on, people going back to Europe, British people going to live in Canada, Australia, Spain, New Zealand, and the idea that you can just replace one for the other, that works on an economic or infrastructure level if you're talking about school places and so forth, but the culture is changing fundamentally because of that. People are leaving here, and people who are coming here have no understanding of our ways and our culture, and I fear too much of the discussion is about net migration figures. Last year we had 1.3 million gross.
Yes, absolutely. And even if you want to take the economic argument, well, GDP per capita is 4.
Oh, yeah.
So that doesn't work either.
2 million over non-EU over 5 years. That's an unparalleled crime in all of our history. That's how I would characterise that. We've had many enemies of England over the years. I think of maybe the Duke of Parma or something, or whoever, Napoleon, Piers Gaveston, many sort of traitors and enemies. That's one. Preeti Patel is one of the worst of all time. And how dare she sit there and smirking away that she didn't do anything wrong, and that she did the right thing, didn't she? No, you didn't do the right thing, Preeti. No, you did a terrible, terrible thing. Guilty of a terrible, terrible degree of treason.
We must never forget and never forgive, because this was not just her, but for the last 20 years, has been the greatest act of harm in our history, in 2,000 years of our history, far more consequential than the costs of fighting the Second World War. We were never given a vote on this. We were given a vote on Brexit, but this is far more consequential than Brexit. We must never, ever forget and forgive those who've done this to this nation, because, of course, we've gone through bad times of economic crisis, but an economy can rebound because we were culturally intact in previous generations, in the 70s and so forth. That's no longer the case.
Yeah, what the invasion they've allowed to happen is worse than the Roman invasion, worse than the Norman invasion.
And the Romans, as far as I'm aware, didn't even really leave any genetic trace in our own population. They came here, they built a bunch of infrastructure, and they left.
Yeah.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow our series Lads Hour, where we always have a good bit of fun and have a bit of a laugh. It's behind the paywall, so you get to see all the things that you wouldn't normally see on things like YouTube. And if you want to see all the other work we're doing, you can follow us on Twitter, where we post links to everything. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.